welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I'm Kim Menninger, and I am so grateful that you are here. It's now been more than a year since I started this podcast, and I can't tell you how much I've learned and grown from the conversations that we've had here. As you may have heard me share, I have struggled with imposter syndrome and anxiety for much of my life, so this is a very personal journey for me. I do this podcast because I want us to share our stories with each other and to stop suffering in silence. Imposter syndrome is a pretty universal human experience and nothing we should be ashamed of. By listening to or supporting this podcast, you're helping me to advance my mission of destigmatizing this conversation and making it safe for everyone to be vulnerable and get the support they need. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support this mission even further, please consider subscribing. And if you feel inclined to leave a 5-star review, this really does help raise the visibility of the podcast so that others can find us. And please consider sharing with your friends. Lastly, if you have a story you'd like to share, connect with me anytime. I would be happy to interview you. Thanks again for being here. Welcome, Ivna. I can't wait to have this conversation with you today. We kind of started a little bit before we hit record, but before we do that, I would love to invite you to introduce yourself to us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And I love what you're doing here. It's absolutely phenomenal. And we all go through this. My name is Ivna Curi, and I am currently the CEO and founder of a company called Assertive, where we empower you to empower yourself with positive assertiveness skills. And we really focus on the professional side for women. And we were talking earlier about women in male-dominated fields. That's an area that, as I've been through, and I've lived that reality, and it's not easy. And so it's definitely an area, the kind of, not only women in male-dominated environments, but women in general who want to speak up, but that feel a little bit scared of doing so, that, are held back a little bit. And I also work with minorities, immigrants, Asians, folks who generally have a hard time speaking up and women, obviously, because they're scared of that, like we were talking about, that backlash effect. And that's why it's even more important to learn how to stand up for yourself in a positive, kind, respectful way, which we will be talking about soon. So yes, and my background is in engineering, analytics. I worked in the corporate sector for a while, and I had a few teams, worked in different continents, not just in the US. So all of that has helped me get into this whole assertiveness thing and decide that this is the path that I want to take moving forward. And it's such an important skill that I decided this is something that I want everybody to learn. And it's not, taught at school or anywhere. So that's why I've gotten into this.
I love what you're doing, and that you're teaching people something that we not only haven't learned, but that we often misunderstand, I think, and are sometimes afraid of. And, I'm going to ask you a lot more about what you do and how you think about assertiveness. But before we do that, I'd love to get your thoughts on what imposter syndrome means to you and whether or not it's ever shown up for you in your work or in your life.
It's showed up all the time. It has always been there, and you learn to manage it. Well, at least that's what happened for me. And for me, the way I like to describe it, it's confusion, right? It's a lot of confusion that we go through that causes us to ruminate and overthink things. It's confusion about what we have to offer, our talent, the potential we have, and how it's perceived by others. It's confusion around what matters in that moment, in that interaction, in that conversation. It's really a lot of confusion. And I think that if we focus more on on clarifying things to reduce that confusion, I think would be a lot easier. And that's a path that I've followed. And it showed up to me. It showed up in my life, in my career, mainly, always. And maybe I can share an example.
Sure.
When I was in my third job, but still fairly young, 25 years old, I felt like in this job, it was my first manager job, right? The first time managing a team. And I felt like everything was falling apart. Nothing was working. Like everything that came to me and I had to handle was just dismantling. And I was like, this is a mess. Like I'm not doing anything right. And everything was scary and everybody was complaining. My team was always upset, and the people that I was serving were always upset, and our clients were, everybody seemed always upset and in an emergency mode. And I thought, I'm just the worst manager on planet Earth. Like this is, I don't even know, what's going to happen to me. I mean, I don't know what my boss thinks of me. This is terrible. And that went on for about a year. And then I wanted to get, I was in that job temporarily because I wanted to get that management experience so that I could apply for an MBA of my choice. And I knew that would increase my chances of getting in. And so at that point, I'm like, I am a wreck. I'm terrible, but I need the money to finance this MBA. So I don't know where to get. I had tried all routes. I said, I'm going to ask my boss for money. And it had been like, not even a year. And I said, no, there's no way he's going to pay for this because I would have to leave the job. And I'm a terrible performer, but I'm going to do it anyways because I don't have another option. And the desire for that experience with that specific MBA was so big that I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to do it. I don't have another alternative right now. And to my surprise, not only did my boss say yes, not immediately, but within a month, he said yes. But he also started to compliment me so much and say so wonderful things, like just give me so much positive feedback. And this was my favorite boss of my entire life because he always gave me a lot of support. But then because he started to tell me all these great things of what he appreciated in me, I started to realize that, even though I thought everything was falling apart, I could see through his eyes why he thought I was doing extraordinarily well. And it was one of those moments where I always go back to that sometimes and think, sometimes things look messy and I feel incompetent, but somebody out there, usually my boss or somebody in the company sees something else. And I want to find out what it is that they see. And I make it a point to figure out what they see because they see something that I can't see. They see potential that I can't see. They see, in my boss, in my case, he said, I keep throwing you all the biggest problems that I have, and you keep handling everything. And you keep absorbing it and you handle it with poise. And it seems like you have infinite ability of resolving problems. And I did not see that at all. So, it was a fascinating experience for me.
I love what you're saying about, and what I'm sort of thinking about is we're so attuned to our behind the scenes messiness, right? But that's true for everyone, right? And if you think about the impression that we have of other people, we don't see how they got to what they're producing, right? We just see the finished product in many cases. And so I love that you're recognizing that there's a distinction between how you see yourself and how other people see you, and that it's important to understand that, to ask for that information.
Yes, absolutely ask. And that's part of the confusion part. And, I had that experience early on, but that doesn't mean that the imposter syndrome left. My next job and the other job and the next job, it just keeps coming back like a boomerang. But now I have tools. Like you said, that's one of them, right? To undo this confusion is like, ask people for what they think. Try to understand. I know it's the scary thing. Like you think if you bring attention to yourself, then they're going to fire you for sure. Because then you're going to bring attention to all your faults and everything that you do wrong and everything that's not good. Like, aren't we all scared sometimes? Those of us that suffer from imposter syndrome, of annual performance review.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's like so scary.
Well, and it's interesting because if fear is the driver, which it often is, right? We overestimate the consequences of just addressing that question head on, right? It feels super scary and super risky, but to me, the constant anxiety of wondering and not being sure, am I doing this right? Right? What do the other people think of me is far more painful than the moments of discomfort that you feel when you're starting that feedback conversation. At least you walk out of there with concrete information that you can do something with.
Yes, absolutely. And I actually think about that a lot when I'm feeling like an imposter, because I think, you know what, this rumination, this overthinking that's consuming me, I literally think of it as it's sucking my energy away, my productivity, my ability to be great, to do great things, to add value. And it's just reducing you to such a small entity. And it's a lot because of that withdrawal. Like we kind of withdraw from the situation, from everything. And it's not very helpful. It's like, it's almost reminds me, I just thought of this right now. When some people go through depression, and instead of opening up to the world and seeking out support and seeking out people and seeking out more, they kind of go into their little hut and hide. Yeah. And sometimes we tend to do that, and that just makes things worse.
Yes, you're exactly right. We make our worlds really small and we isolate ourselves from the resources that can help us feel better.
The resources and just tapping into the reality, because the more we get into our head, the less we're able to see reality.
Yes.
And the reality often is we're actually doing a lot of things very well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are. We wouldn't, be usually something that I was talking to this lady who felt like she was, again, not doing very well, and just in her head as well. And I asked her, like, why do you think, she's like, I'm terrible, I'm not good. It's like, why did you think your boss hired you? Like, what did they see? What did your boss see in you? And then she's like, oh. And then in that moment, she realized there were all these positive qualities that her boss actually saw in her during the interview that hired her for. And that she had to tap into that. Like, let that be, let yourself, those qualities come through. We don't have to be perfect in, every way. And we tend to think that we do, but opening up and seeking that clarity and asking our bosses and our clients and our peers for constant feedback. And here's the thing, when you also do really good things, like when you think you perform relatively okay, I would say that's a great time to ask for feedback, because you're going to get reinforcing positive messaging, and that's going to help you get out of that.
That's a great point. Now, I have a question for you. Is this your definition of assertiveness, or is there more to it? Like, what does assertiveness mean to you in terms of how you have gotten to the work that you do today?
Oh, yes. Thank you for asking me that question. This is one of the things that most people misunderstand. And it doesn't, like, even folks who have really great education, right, have been in the marketplace for a very long time. When I ask them, what does assertiveness mean to them? I always get answers that are or negative, generally negative. And when I ask women, what does assertiveness mean to you? Do you aspire to be assertive? They're like, no, I don't want to be assertive. I'm like, why don't you want to be assertive? Because of this negative stigma around it. So what assertiveness means is basically to speak your mind, to share your thoughts, your desires, your requests, to defend yourself, to advocate for yourself, to speak up, to share what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're hearing, what you wish to, what your passions are, share your dreams, share your goals, just talk about yourself and what's in your world in a way that is polite, that is respectful, that is thoughtful, that is considerate towards others, and without feeling anxiety about it, without feeling like overthinking it, without having to get all worried about it, which often is what we do, right?
Yeah. And where do you think that anxiety comes from? Why is this so hard?
Well, it's hard because of that pattern that we have growing up, sometimes as a child, especially for women, but also certain people from certain cultures when they have to, like a lot of Asians when they come into, or even some African cultures, I say when they come to a Western culture, it's very different. It's very open. But for women in particular, as you're a child, and like for me, this was the case, you had to like be quiet, like you couldn't speak up. And if being a good girl meant nodding your head and saying yes and listening and always being pleasant and not questioning authority. For other cultures, it's about not questioning authority and not speaking your mind openly, not being negative, and all these things that we're taught. And we think that that's the way that's how people are going to accept us. That's how we're going to be safe. That's how, for me, a huge thing was being obedient, like a young, obedient girl. Like I did what I was told. If there was a classical example, right? If there was food that was given to me on a plate, I couldn't question that food. I couldn't say anything negative about that food. I had to eat that food. And it was only in my mid-20s that I realized that I could say no to food, like to something that people served me and I didn't want to eat it. Like I had, I could say no, I could express that I didn't like the food and that was okay.
Yeah, that obedience piece is so powerful. And I talk about this a lot too, that good girl sort of standard that we have been conditioned to think about. And if that is the mindset that you bring into the workplace, right, that basically your boss is like a parent that you don't question or an authority figure that you never push back on, you accept at face value what's asked of you, it's going to be really hard to advocate for yourself. It's going to be really hard to set boundaries, to negotiate. I mean, all of the things that we kind of associate with leadership and self-advocacy become less available to you if your way of operating is one of making your boss happy at any expense.
Absolutely. And so you're going to suffer a lot internally as an individual contributor. And then as a manager, you're going to make your team suffer.
Absolutely. So what do we do? And I know this is not a problem we can solve in, a 30-minute conversation, but if you sort of high level of what's the starting point for somebody who identifies with this notion of a good girl, wants to be more assertive, but can't find the point at which those two things intersect?
First of all, I would say figure out what type of person you want to be. And for me, it was a realization that everybody called me nice. Everybody described me as nice. I was a nice person. I was nice. I always was described and thought myself as a nice girl, just a nice person. And that's how people would refer to me as. And I said, no, that's not what I want to be anymore. And I allowed that to actually become anger at some point. I hardly ever feel anger, but that one of the things around assertiveness is that allowing yourself to feel certain things is a positive sign, because you can use that negative, energy, like that anger or that frustration, to fuel action, to fuel doing something about it. And at that point, I started to reflect, okay, what is it that I want to be? If not nice, how do I want to be seen and treated and by other people, right? And for me, that was, I looked at tons of objectives, and I thought, you know what, I want to be respected and I want to be respectful. And out of all of those words that I found, it's like respected and respectful. But right now, I'm not being respected. Being nice does not earn me respect, and does not earn respect for my team. And it does not get the best out of me and of what I can deliver to the world. And so from that moment, things also started to shift, because I'm like, is this action that I'm taking right now respectful and allowing others to respect me, or earning respect from others? And often all of those things that I considered nice were not earning respect, were not something that would give me the adjective of, being respected, of being someone who is respected. So that was a huge change as the starting point of kind of changing. It wasn't really the starting point of assertiveness for me, but I think that's a great place for people to start thinking about what they want to be and gaining that clarity.
I love what you're saying about this idea of being respected and respectful, because I think sometimes we think that it's an either or proposition, right? Like I can either be nice or I can be respected. And that's often how we've been conditioned to think. But what you're describing is I can be respected and at the same time be respectful of other people. Excuse me. And I think that's how I frame assertiveness in my own mind, is that I'm not just honoring your needs and values and, what makes you feel respected, but I'm at the same time honoring my own.
Oh, yes. Yes. So for example, a nice person might not disagree, but a respectful and respected person would disagree, and would disagree in the right, polite, thoughtful way. A nice person might not say no, but a respected and respectful person would say no, and would know how to do it in a proper way that would be a win-win for both. Mm-hmm. A nice person would not make a decision that is a hard decision, that feels harsh, or would give negative feedback, for example, in a very clear way. But a respected and respectful person knows that that's the right thing to do sometimes, and they would do so in a very humane, dignified way. And that's the subtle difference.
Well, I love how you attach it to who you want to be as well, because I think, most of us would like to think of ourselves as nice people, right? We don't want to be the opposite of that. But oftentimes in our effort to be nice, what we're really doing is just being safe. And being safe doesn't help us to achieve our goals. And it also doesn't advance the goals of the organization as well, right? I mean, our unwillingness to take risks or to address things that we disagree with, it deprives people of our unique perspective and the strengths and the expertise that we bring to the table.
Absolutely. And sometimes the issue is that we don't feel like we have anything valuable to share or to say, right? Even though we do, we have that feeling that maybe we don't have something, or maybe that our rights are not, or we don't deserve to be at the table, or that we don't deserve. That's often like what happens, right? Sometimes when we have imposter feelings is, I don't know, I don't deserve to be here. Mm-hmm. And And one of the things that I find that is very helpful as well is when you have something much, and again, it goes back to the clarity theme. When you have clarity around what you want and why you want it, and you want it so bad, then that trumps all of that fear and unwillingness to claim space and claim what's yours. And that desire could be a strong desire to achieve something. So in my case, I wanted that MBA. I wanted when I applied for the first time when I asked for the first time for a position so I could manage a team, right, with no experience, I was feeling like the worst employee ever as an analyst. Like I was totally feeling like I just did not deserve it. But even though sometimes it's hard to change a feeling on its own, but what I encourage people to do, and especially with assertiveness, is to speak up more, do more, take more action, even if you feel the imposter syndrome, because by doing that, you're going to help create more clarity and it's going to slowly wear off. It's a very hard thing just to dissipate imposter by thinking about it, And for me, my experience is taking action based on, usually it's a very deep desire for something greater. And for me, that was, one was an international, I wanted an international career. So that was a huge, deep desire that trumped everything else. The other one was my team. I wanted to support my team. I wanted to empower my team. I was so connected. I said, I have to do everything it takes, and I'm willing to do what it takes to help my team grow and develop. And I realized that I was my imposter syndrome was getting in the way. And so that shift in focusing on what you want helped me navigate through that fear, through that feeling of not being enough and not deserving that, and not deserving a seat at the table, or my voice not being meaningful, and doing what I had to do. And then when you do it, when you speak up and when you share and when you talk about your desires and your needs and your wants and what you don't like, and all of that, then suddenly people start to respond to you and you get cues. And usually you get a lot of positive cues. You get more eye contact from people, from senior people that you respect. You get more people say your name more often, in the meeting or in conversations or in emails or messaging. They start to refer to your ideas more. And then when you start to see that people are acknowledging you and what you say and what you bring to the table, then you start to feel like maybe I do belong here.
Oh, I love what you're saying. And it reminds me of how I think about this, because I couldn't agree with you more on this idea of knowing what you want first, because fear will always be there. Fear will always be there whenever we're going into something that's uncomfortable or uncertain. And so we have to know what's bigger than the fear. And what you're talking about is exactly what I mean by what's bigger than the fear, right? If I know what I want and I know what it takes to get there, then I have a motivation for facing that fear, right? If I don't know what I want and I'm not sure what I bring to the table, and there's a lot of ambiguity around who I am and why I'm here, there isn't that internal motivation to push through the fear. The motivation is to just hide, right? Just hope that no one else finds out, right? But if I know what I want, what's my mission here, right? Now I know that I have to play bigger in order to achieve that. And what you're describing is exactly right. Is you behave differently and other people respond differently. And that creates its own self-perpetuating effect. And now I'm building these muscles, so to speak, right? By doing that I wouldn't have built. Like I always say this, right? Confidence doesn't come first. You don't wait until you're confident to do something. You do something and then you build confidence along the way.
Yes. Do. I'm all about the do. Mm-hmm. When I say do, is like do, speak up, show yourself, get out there, be visible instead of hiding. The more you show up, the more you are visible to others, the more you you allow yourself to shine and be seen, even if you feel like, okay, you know what, I'm going to be fired. Now they're going to really see how terrible I am, how inadequate I am. Right? I know there are people when I try to encourage people to speak up in meetings a lot, right? Because that's something that all my team members had struggled with. I struggled at the beginning of my career, and hiding and not speaking up in a meeting is not doing anybody any positive, outcomes. Like you're not contributing, you're not bringing value to the table, and nobody's getting benefit from you there, and your career is gonna get stuck, right? Because you're not being heard and seen, and people are thinking that you're just a puppet there in the room. But what happens is we start overthinking things, and we want every single thing that we say to be the most intelligent, smart, thoughtful comment ever. And when you stop, and something that I did a lot in my career at the beginning was sometimes just to listen to people and see, and folks who were being taken seriously, people who were respected, and try to understand. And I'm very analytical because of my background, trying to understand the significance. Everything sounded so important. But then I started to break down and think about the significance of the different arguments that they brought to the table. And I realized there wasn't much. Like, there wasn't anything spectacular ever. But they said it. They brought it up. They were always making comments. So the more they talked, the more likely that one thing out of 30 that they said was going to hit the table, like make people think and sound interesting. But if we hide and we don't speak up, if we don't share what we have to say, if we don't talk about our goals and our dreams and our vision and our values, then first, we're not allowing people to see what we bring to the table, because we are multifaceted individuals, right? Our value does not come from only our experience. Often it comes from our potential. It comes from our values. It comes from the way we interact with individuals. But then we as women tend to think, no, it's just based on our experience and on the specific numbers we bring to the table. But there's so much more than that. And if you don't show it to the world, then you'll never see it, because they won't tell you what they appreciate, and you won't attract the people. Here's the thing: the more you share, the more you attract the people that value what you have to offer in whatever kind of corporate environment or business you're in.
Yes. And I think this is an important point too, because we're talking about how a lot of how we show up is conditioned in us early in life, whether it's through our parents, our cultures, other people's values, right, have influenced how we show up. And unfortunately, a lot of women in particular have experienced workplace cultures that don't value them for who they are. And so what's really important is that if you do put yourself out there and you start to show up in these more powerful, values-driven ways, and it's not welcome or accepted by your manager, your organization, whatever the case may be, that you don't make that about you, that this is really important data to help you realize that this is not an environment where you can thrive. But that is not because of you. That is because the environment isn't structured in a way to appreciate and leverage what you bring to the table.
Exactly. And the earlier you figure that out, the better for your career.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think it's so easy so many of us have had those kinds of experiences with, all it takes is to have one bad manager or one bad experience in an organization, and to just feel like I have to keep my mouth shut from now on, right? Or there's something wrong with me, when in actuality, it's not a fit. And you have choices. And I think that's really important from a confidence perspective for all of us to remember too, is if it ever reaches the point where it's just not working, you have the power to say, this isn't right for me.
Absolutely. And I also encourage people, to in order to figure these things out, to discover if the fit is there early on, and to see if you are willing to do what it takes to thrive in that specific environment you're in, is to clarify some of the things that are unspoken early on and often, because environments change and the culture changes, and the people around you change. So one of the problems with lack of assertiveness is that we make a lot of assumptions, and assumptions are like a killer of all good things, right? Of good relationships, of positive impact, and then they create not only rumination, overthinking, but they create aggressive thoughts. So sometimes a nice person is full of aggressiveness, even though it's unspoken, even though it's not shown. So for example, we make an assumption about, let's say, our boss, that they're bad, that they're mean, that they don't, they're not good, they don't understand us, they don't respect us. But we fail to ask them what is important to them, what they value. So we can think to ourselves that our boss cannot see our value, they don't recognize us. But we never took the time to ask our boss what is important to them. What are they looking for? What are their expectations? What kind of projects or work is valuable to them? How do they want to see us perform? Sometimes what I've seen a lot, for example, like for me, it was really important for the team to get out and talk to people and interact with the stakeholders a lot more. And I saw that even with my boss wanted the team members to be out there and have these dialogue, these conversations, to understand what really was needed from the team. But a lot of the team members just wanted to sit, in their cubicle and do their analytics work. But that wasn't seen as a high value add kind of activity sometimes for the boss. But the individual's thinking that, oh my goodness, they're putting all this effort into all this work, but there's not alignment there. And the problem is we start judging and blaming and all these things in our head. That's aggressiveness. Even though we don't say it, we're being aggressive, we're being judgmental, because we're just assuming bad things in people, and we're not trying to clarify and build a bridge.
Yeah, that's such a great way to look at it, because if the goal is to be nice, then we can realize how it can actually be nicer, right? To simply ask the questions and do the scary things than it is to make these kinds of negative assumptions in our own minds about ourselves and others.
Absolutely. Yeah. I realized as a nice person, for a long time, I was nice. I was passive aggressive, actually.
Yeah.
And, I that silent look that you're like angry. You're like, you're such a terrible person. And then you look at them and you make the face, but they ask you what's going on. You're like, nothing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm fine.
I'm fine. What's your problem? I think there's a problem. And that type of behavior was just that was aggressive. That was 100% aggressive. Or, someone shows up late and you start thinking that they're lazy. You don't say it, but then you start treating them like a lazy person or a non-reliable person. Sure, they could have communicated better or whatever, but sometimes if you look into it and you ask them, you realize that they had a sick child that's going through a difficult time or something, and you're not having empathy. But to have empathy, you have to communicate.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness, Ivna. Like I could talk to you all day. You have to share so many powerful insights. And I think that there's no denying how important assertiveness is to our overall experience at work and certainly to our confidence. Is there anything you would say in closing that you want people to take away from this conversation today?
Well, I could keep talking forever about it. I love this topic. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak about it. But in closing, since we do have to close, I would like to bring back, the central theme around to help the imposter syndrome, to increase your confidence, to actually be a better person, is get rid of those assumptions and seek clarity. And when I say seek clarity around what people want and why they behave in certain ways. Give them the benefit of doubt. Seek clarity around why people chose you for a position. If you feel like I'm not worthy of being here, I have nothing to offer. Remind yourself and try to understand, or even ask them, why did you bring me here? Why did you put me in this project? Why did you bring me into this position? Get clear on what people view as valuable, and make sure that there's alignment there, and what success means to you. Get clear on who you are and what you bring to the table, and what your values are, because a lot of who you are, it's not just your deliverables necessarily, but it's also the values that you bring into your role, into your position, into your work. And understand that you're more than just that person performing there in the moment, right? You're bringing value in many different ways. So just seek clarity as much as you can, and speak up and share, and always engage in dialogue. Always engage in dialogue, because you're going to get a lot more out of that, and you're going to get out of your cocoon, and you're going to get feedback. Ask for feedback. So just very quickly here, some of the elements of assertiveness are giving and receiving feedback, both positive and negative. Like, people who have imposter syndrome tend to be terrible at receiving positive feedback, right? You got to figure that out. Another thing is saying no and establishing boundaries. How to say things that are negative, that are sometimes as a leader, you need to deliver negative news. How do you do that in an assertive way? How do you ask for things, be it for resources, for time, for more work-life balance, whatever it is that you need and your team needs to thrive? How do you promote yourself, right, without bragging? Bragging a little bit, but how do you self-promote and promote your work and your team's work in positive ways? All those things are about engaging, speaking up, staying in dialogue, getting feedback going. Every time you talk, every time you speak up, share your ideas, you'll get some sort of feedback, a look, a comment, an invite for something, right? The reason why you invited me is because you probably saw me speaking about something right, somewhere. And so you have to share your voice, and that's going to give you a lot of clarity as well. And that's going to help you defeat imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. Excellent advice. I am going to include your information in the show notes too. So if anybody wants to learn more from you and follow up with you, your information will be there. But thank you so much, Ivna. This has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And this is wonderful what you're doing. And I'm sure you're helping a lot of women in this world to feel more confident. So thank you for your amazing work.
Thanks again for listening. If you'd like to stay connected, please join the Leading Women discussion group, which meets every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. This is a place where women come together to discuss questions or challenges related to leadership development and career management. It's a great place to learn from, support, and connect with other women on similar journeys. In addition to the weekly calls, we also have a Facebook group and a Slack channel where we stay connected and support each other. Please join us there too. You can check out the show notes for the links. Before we wrap up, if you like this podcast, I would love to share another podcast with you that I know you will enjoy. Do you ever find yourself playing small? Do you want to take risks, but in the end, you end up taking the safe route? Does your inner critic keep you from reaching your full potential? As counterintuitive as it often feels, we don't become confident first and then take action. It's through our actions that we build our confidence. That's why one of the greatest ways to manage imposter syndrome is by taking brave and bold action. If you want inspiration and insights to help you to take action and to be brave at work, then my friend and colleague Jen Pastikas's Brave Women at Work podcast is for you. Jen and I met when we interviewed each other for our podcasts, and I knew instantly that Jen and I shared a similar worldview and a commitment to empowering women to be our best selves. On her podcast, Jen digs into common challenges such as perfectionism, boundary setting, and burnout, all to empower us to shift our mindsets and play bigger in the workplace. You can find the Brave Women at Work podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Visit the show notes for the relevant links. Thanks again, and please stay in touch.